What is going on, everyone? In today's episode, I'm gonna hopefully blow your mind because this absolutely blew my mind once I discovered this as a beginning gardener. And I didn't learn it until I was working at a commercial greenhouse. When I was first starting out gardening, I made the biggest mistake ever, and that was transplanting into a larger container too soon. And so in today's episode, I'm gonna show you how to know when is the best time to move these seedlings into either the garden or a larger container. Let's go. So the first mistake that I made as a beginning gardener when it came to transplanting my seedlings into larger containers is the moment I saw roots, I panicked. If you're someone that does this, you're gonna be making the same mistake over and over again, and you're gonna be costing yourself not only a ton of time, a ton of money, but potentially your plant's health. And so when you start to see roots popping out the bottom of your seedling trays, oftentimes it is a very common misconception that gardeners will say, the moment you see roots, they're time to transplant. The problem is that depending on your soil type, a very loose soil is going to offer very good root development. How you water will offer very good root development or very poor root development. We actually practice bottom watering, and so it encourages roots to move down to find the water. And so naturally, they're going to go through the bottom of the pot. But these little itty bitty seedlings, there's no way they're ready to transplant yet. But if I went off of that common saying of the moment you see roots, they're time to transplant, I'd be transplanting something that would be nowhere near ready to transplant yet. Second mistake that I made as a beginning gardener was thinking that a smaller cell would need to be transplanted faster than a bigger one. And this is a really common mistake because a lot of gardeners will plant their stuff in a giant 3-inch pot, thinking that it's going to buy themselves more time, when in fact it actually ends up costing them more time because it takes a lot more time for that plant, even if it does survive, to get acclimated to this much soil. This pot does not breathe, and so that causes there to be a lot of excess moisture, which can lead to root rot or dampening off. If the plant does survive, there is so much room for that plant to actually develop that it's going to be in here for ages and ages. What I prefer to do is actually go down a size from what I think I need, and then I'm in a smaller cell, which is actually better for overall plant health, especially when we're growing indoors. And that overall plant health is going to mean you might have to transplant a tad bit sooner, but it's going to be an overall healthier plant rather than just putting it into a larger pot. And so if you're someone that has always heard go bigger rather than smaller, that's a big mistake. Smaller is sometimes better than bigger. All right, the third mistake that a lot of gardeners make, and I know I personally made more than ever, and that was the idea that the moment you see adult leaves, it's time to transplant. And that's just not true. Check it out. In the case of these peppers here, these peppers formed adult leaves about 4 weeks ago. If we transplanted the moment we saw adult leaves forming, we would have been transplanting some underdeveloped seedlings that aren't ready to be moved yet. And what happens is when you move an underdeveloped seedling, you're ultimately going to be damaging roots, which can ultimately harm the plant rather than help it. And so in the case of these peppers, I like to think of all my seedlings, not just the peppers, but all my seedlings, the way that my grandma's friend Bob Iger taught me. And Bob was an amazing gardener. They would go down to Florida and they would hang out. They lived near Sebring, Florida. And he had an absolutely amazing garden. It was more like a little mini farm. And what he taught me is that down in Florida, they have a lot of hermit crabs. And he said, you need to think of your plants as hermit crabs. And when you hear this, you're never gonna think about plants the same way again. It's awesome. Hermit crabs only shed their shell when they need to. And oftentimes hermit crabs, depending on the size, can be a really big hermit crab or a really small hermit crab. The shell size has to do with what's inside the shell, not with what's outside the shell. And you can think of your seedlings as what's outside the shell. You see, these plants here are ready to be transplanted, but they don't have a time up top when they're ready. It's when down below is ready. And so if I take these seedlings and I pull them out, what you'll notice is, look at this. These seedlings here have your seed leaves, one set of nice adult leaves, and 2 sets of adult leaves, and they still could survive in these trays for probably another 2 weeks before it's time to transplant them. Now, I don't need to wait that long, but we're gonna take these out here. I'm gonna kind of squeeze these, kind of loosen them up a little bit, pull them out. You'll notice the reason why they're breaking is because they're still not fully ready yet. They could be transplanted, but they could also just as well wait another couple weeks. And again, 1 set of adult leaves, 2 sets of adult leaves, and even a beginning of a 3rd set of adult leaves. So what do I look for, right? So if you're not looking for roots coming out the bottom, and I'm not looking for adult leaves, what do I look for? Well, I look for keys in the overall growth. If the growth is accelerating and it's not decelerating, that's a positive sign. That still means that there's enough nutrients for that plant to be growing in that confined area. And a lot of you think that a confined area is a bad thing. And it can be if it's kept in that confined area too long. It's the sweet spot. It's the Goldilocks of life, right? You don't want to keep them in there not long enough, otherwise you're pulling them out and you're ripping plant roots and you're damaging their plant roots, stressing them out. You don't want to leave them in there too long because, again, you can leave them in there too long and then they start to get very root bound and coiled up. It's that sweet spot of just right. And that varies based on the plant. It varies on how fast that plant grows, how fast the root system grows, as well as how much soil is there for the roots to take up, even as well as how much nutrients are in that soil. Because a plant could be growing in a crack of a sidewalk. If there's lots of nutrients to provide the growth and the vigor for that plant, it doesn't care if it's in a crack of a sidewalk or if it's in, an Olympic swimming pool filled with the best compost in the world. It's still going to grow the same. And so the amount of soil, the amount of nutrients in that soil plays a big role as well. And you really ultimately have to assess, is the plant slowing down? Is it forming smaller leaves? Is it maybe turning slightly yellow? Are there a lot of roots starting to really bust out, right, where it might be getting root bound? I also may take one plant, pull it up like I just did, and really just assess, because I don't have clear trays to see what those roots look like. I don't know what they look like. And so because of that, I may sacrifice one or two at a time when I think might be ideal. And if it's not, I wait, right? And that's why I have multiple seedlings growing, is because I know that I may sacrifice one or two to figure out that right time. It also varies based on the year, right? Some years we might be transplanting in 5 to 6 weeks on peppers. Other years we may wait 7 to 8 weeks. It totally depends. All right, and if you look up close here, this is the final thing that I look for. And this is something that Bob actually taught me. And this is something that is really critical to know when your plant is ready. And that is the formation of support aerial roots. Now, it's really hard to see, but if we had a magnifying glass, we could see the stem of this pepper forming some aerial roots. And those aerial roots form once the root system is so developed down here that it really can't develop much more. And so it starts to support itself with some roots up above. And that can happen when it's time to be transplanted. And so what we're going to do is we're going to squeeze these. We're going to get these ready to go out of their trays here. You'll notice it shouldn't come out completely all roots. If it comes out completely all roots, it's been in there too long. But it also shouldn't completely break away and rip away. That means there's not enough root development to hold that plug in place. These should come out like a nice cone, or they should come out like the shape of the cell that you're planting them in. And then once we transplant, we simply move them into their pot that they're going to move into. In this case, we're moving them into a 3-inch pot here. And that's going to provide enough growth for another probably 1 to 2 months of growth. The roots are not brown. They're nice and white. They don't have a lot of coiling to them. They're just holding that plug in place just perfectly. And that's exactly what you want to see. All right, so to prove my point, I'm going to do something that I wouldn't recommend you do, but I'm going to pull up an underdeveloped seedling. Now, this is what happens when you go by the idea that adult leaves or roots coming out the bottom means that it's time to be transplanted. This seedling here is way more underdeveloped than some of the other ones, and that's because not every seedling grows at the same pace. But we're going to try to pull this out. Ah, look at that. Hardly any roots. Those roots are down in this pot here that we just ripped up. We can get them out. Maybe we can't get them out, but yeah, see, look at that. I'm pulling them out to the bottom. Those nice roots were in that pot, but they're gone. And so ultimately, this is going to be a very stressed little seedling that's now going to have to take those 2 itty bitty little roots, sustain this whole top growth on this plant, and hope that it catches up to the growth of these other ones. It's just not going to happen. Or it's going to happen, but it might happen a whole lot slower than had we just waited for the plant to tell us when it was ready to be transplanted. We ultimately have to wait for that plant to communicate that to us unless we really understand our plants, really understand those time frames, and you kind of have those windows. You can go by a window. You can say, I'm not gonna check until that 5-week mark, because in a cell size like this, a pepper plant, anything before 5 weeks, no shot. Even the fastest growth possible, is not going to be ready in 5 weeks. So don't even check. After 5 weeks, like I said, you can start to look for some of those clues, pull one up, see how it reacts to you pulling it up, popping it up. If it does well, look for plants that are similar in size in that stage of development. Those are probably going to be ready as well. If it's not, don't force it, just wait. It makes no sense to force it because it's not needing to be transplanted. So that is the pimento pepper. We got a lot more to transplant, so we're going to get to that. But I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you all learned something new. And again, this changed my life. This totally changed how I transplant, when I transplant, and it really changed when I decide when a plant is ready to be moved. And ultimately, I have healthier, happier seedlings because of it. I have way less loss, and I'm actually further along in my garden than had I forced something trying to micromanage my garden. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Hopefully you all did. If you did, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and also share this video with a friend. I appreciate that. When you trust our videos with a friend's garden, that means a lot. So thank you all so much. And as always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow bigger. Take care.